D&D has a serious bloodsucker problem, in that D&D bloodsuckers suck a little bit too little. This week on Dungeon Brews, I'm going to give you some more bloodsuckers to fill out your undead roster inspired by folklore from around the world. I'm Sam, and this is the show where I desperately shoehorn things from my favourite TV shows, movies and video games into the only TTRPG I know how to play. I know what you're thinking. Sam, if you like vampires, you should probably just play Vampire the Masquerade. And yes, I am looking forward to playing Vampire the Masquerade Blood Hunt, but no, I don't have enough time to learn another TTRPG system. So I'm afraid you're wrong. There is only one TTRPG, and it's this one, the one I like. So regardless of how sensible it might be, I'm going to force as many genres as I possibly can into this one game. I'm going to fit more genres into it until it's sick and bloated and ready to burst. And then, like the fat goose it is, I'm going to keep on force feeding it and eat its liver, because that's what it wants, because it's been naughty. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. There are many different kinds of vampires, but regardless of where you're from, when someone says vampire to you, you probably think of Vlad Tepes, Dracula, the eponymous count from Bram Stoker's famous 19th century epistolary novella. But aside from Dracula, lots of different cultures have different ideas of what vampires are. They're pretty ubiquitous. There are striggers from Albania, there are vrikolakas from Greece, and even chupacabras, creatures from South America which are believed to drink the blood of goats, are technically vampires. Regardless of what culture you're from or the culture you're studying, you're highly likely to find a mythical creature along the lines of something which moves around at night and drains the vital forces from something or someone. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the history behind why these myths exist, but the top line is, until very recently, we didn't understand how or why bodies decomposed. And so, if you were heading through the woods and you found a desiccated corpse, an easy way to potentially explain what had happened is that something had come along, killed that creature, and drank its blood in order to sustain itself. D&D has vampires, the most famous of which would be Strahd von Zarovich, who is, if anything, the perfect example of the archetype of the 19th century vampire, a very pale nobleman living in a castle and draining the blood of women who chance upon his home. When you think of Count Strahd von Zarovich, you're not too far away from Count Dracula, and both of these vampires are based on the traditional Romanian vampire, the Strigoi. And actually, they've done a pretty good job with Strahd, but personally, I think that the more interesting vampires are not pale, lonely nobles living in castles. They're less sexy, and they're a lot more animalistic. Historically, D&D had more of these vampires. It had more kinds of vampires. In 4th edition, there are tons. Two of my favourites are spirit vampires and corpse vampires, and it's the last one I really want to talk about because I think they're a great addition to any gothic horror campaign. After the spell plague, if a humanoid had been buried in polluted ground or buried improperly, there was a chance that they would be resurrected as a corpse vampire. They look like humans, but they're really animalistic in how they behave. Rather than sleeping in coffins, they bury in nests in the ground during the day. They move really slowly, but pounce on their prey from up above, and they hunt in packs, often with other kinds of undead. And that makes them really, really easy to implement. All you need to do is take a zombie, remove their slam attack, and replace it with a bite attack. In order to provide these creatures with a bit more longevity, prove they're a vampire, that bite attack, whatever damage it does, the creature is going to heal by half of the damage it deals. As well as the bite attack, it needs a pounce attack, which is just going to allow them to cover 15 feet of distance and strike against a foe. Also, one of the coolest features about this creature is that if it kills a player or a person by draining their blood, they are resurrected as a corpse vampire. And if it kills a player without draining their blood, they're resurrected as a zombie. Regardless of their bestiality though, these creatures are still fundamentally humanoid. Now, there is a wide spectrum of vampires and vampiric creatures from all around the world, many of which are inspired by real-world creatures, and one of those most famous creatures is the vampire bat. And you see huge numbers of myths of vampires, especially in Africa, which are based around huge, grotesque bats, which are almost like gargoyles. Obviously, another kind of vampire that shows no humanoid traits would be the chupacabra, but personally, I think one of the greatest bestial vampires is the Ekimmara from Andrzej Sapkowski's Witcher series. These are huge, bat-like creatures which get around using echolocation, can momentarily turn invisible, regenerate for as long as they're in the dark, and rather than using their teeth to draw blood, use their elongated claws to do so, and then drink from the wounds. An easy way to make an Ekimmara is to give them a claw attack, a bite attack, passive regeneration, invisibility, which could take the form of Misty Step in that they can disappear and reappear somewhere else, blind sight, and finally, something that's really cool is the ability to mimic sounds that this creature has heard before in order to distract and confuse players. Now this is something that won't necessarily come into play during combat, but if your players are hunting one of these creatures, it's a great way to add some ambience to the quest and send your players down the wrong trail. This here is a great stat block I found online. I've been using it for a while. The link is down below, and I highly recommend just dragging this straight into your game as a monster hunt. Finally, sometimes you want a vampire which subverts your expectations. Something that's not animalistic, is decidedly humanoid, but a little bit There are tons of examples of these, but my all-time favourite is the Manananggal, a creature which takes the form of a beautiful human by day, but at night tears its torso away from its legs, sprouts huge wings, forms a giant hollow tongue which is used as a proboscis, and flies around the world, draining the blood of pregnant women like an oversized mosquito. If you want to pop one into your game really easily, you need a creature which can exclusively perform bite attacks, but has a 20-foot range on that bite. There is already an amazing stat block made by Miguel Colon for the publication Asian Creatures, and something really cool that's done here is that this creature can latch onto someone, a player or an NPC, and if it stays attached to them for a minute, it reduces their constitution by 2 until their next long rest, which 1 adds more threat to any encounter, and 2 adds an element of realism. If you're having pints and pints of blood drained out of your body, you're probably going to be feeling a little bit weaker. All of these creatures are a great opportunity to add flavour to your game with very little effort, not least because they come with such a colourful backstory and history, which immediately can be turned into little side quests with ease. For these 3 creatures alone, you have really simple plot hooks. Pregnant women who have been found in their beds, desiccated, drained of blood, horses in the fields which have been slashed at and left weak, or graves which have been upturned and the bodies inside them have disappeared. Vampires of all kinds are so easy to bring into D&D, and they are so much more diverse than a bunch of rich dudes wearing black capes. Anyway, I've been Sam, this has been Dungeon Brews, and there will be another video next week here on Roll Together RPG, so don't forget to subscribe, I guess. Ting tong!